in the context of researching people, companies, or industries, what are some LinkedIn tricks? What is surprising about the platform, or something that you have found useful as a researcher? And I'll leave, then the second part, I'm going to let you answer that one because it's a big question. But the second part is, what are your go-to databases during your research process?
I don't know if anyone wants to start first, but
you can go ahead if you had pop to mind.
I would say the really cool thing about LinkedIn, outside of the fact, I mean, it's great for sales, but I think it's really great just personally. It's social media, and like any social media, it does have like an analytics portion, right? There's a I guess like a back end to it that you can really tap into. So I find it interesting, whatever I post, right? LinkedIn will tell me how many views I've gotten so far. And it depends if you have premium or not, right? If you have premium, you might be able to get an extra layer of visibility. But if you don't, it still allows you to see how many, what roles, like the titles that people hold that are looking at that particular post, and the different industries in which they exist, right? And so you might go a step further and be like, okay, hey, maybe someone from PwC viewed that post and they liked it, but they are in stealth mode, right? Or you don't really have a first degree connection, right? That doesn't mean that you don't know similar people or like similar things. So you can easily just go and look up who, PwC in engineering, and see like New York City, if that's where you are, right? Because typically it'll be someone who might be near you geographically. And then you can go an extra layer and see like where did they go to school? Did we go to do we have the same alma mater, or do we know, similar people? Do we follow, a particular person that would make my post visible to them? And you would be really surprised, like you've just probably narrowed down that particular person. And if it's something that you're interested in, bam, you can just send a request and say, hey, thanks so much for viewing, this post and reacting. I'd love to connect. Or maybe not even that, sometimes people don't even do that. Sometimes people just hit connect. So I think that there's a way to use LinkedIn, like to leverage it to your, I guess, like to advantage. You just have to get a little creative. And I think maybe because it's more closely associated with like business than it is like sort of like fun or pleasure, like people kind of forget that it's still very valuable and has, literally free analytics. Maybe even at the very basic level, it's still helpful. It's not the most robust, but it's a starting point. So absolutely. I hope that's helpful.
And the fact that I haven't heard it described as social media, which is surprising because it obviously is, but people think or feel like it's only for business, but it is kind of a social media for your career almost.
Mm-hmm.
But Sara, did you have any LinkedIn tricks or thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I really loved what you said, Tiffany, about it being social media, like Matt pointed out, because it does what most social media does. It is having people represent themselves in the way that they want to be represented. And while there may be a lot of like massaging to their image, just looking at how someone individually wants to professionally represent themselves really says a lot about their ambitions and their goals and their background, particularly if you are trying to understand, how you can maybe sell to this person, or pitch to this person. And on a broader level, like looking at a company's LinkedIn, you can glean insights into how they want to represent themselves. And to Tiffany's point about reaching out or sending connections, like one thing that I have been just generally so surprised about on LinkedIn is how willing people are to help out. So sending folks connections or honestly looking at what groups they've joined and joining them as well can really give you a point of shared interest to reach out to someone. And if you just make it a little personal and say, oh, I've looked at these interests you've listed on your LinkedIn, and I see that you're a part of these groups, and I'm so interested in your experience, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, that, and the other. You would be surprised like how many people will respond well to that. And the worst that can happen is they, don't respond and nothing happens.
Yeah. That's so fascinating that joining groups is kind of a form of research on LinkedIn, at least for the purposes of this class. This is like a hint. If you want to do some research in an industry, like joining a group specific to that industry can be so useful. So I know some of your databases you might not want to share, but for those that are like for those that are generally public, or for this kind of research, students are just trying to understand what are the major issues in an industry, what kind of challenges might a giant company like Google face, or they can bring it closer to home. And so in trying to understand like industry dynamics, I think that was a phrase I often heard. But what are some databases you go to become acquainted with a company?
In my role now at a labor union, and then previously at Blue Heron, which is, did qualitative due diligence for financial firms. There are a lot of overlapping databases that I used, though I might have been using them in a slightly different way. The big ones I think that have been sort of through lines through both are the SEC's financial filings, SEC Edgar. And more recently, because I am dealing with looking at more nonprofits, I'm using GuideStar a lot, which collects data on nonprofits. And it is similar to Edgar in a way where I can look at a nonprofit's financial statements and their IRS filings. And I can drill down and look at the past, 4 or 5 years and try to see where their revenue is trending, if they're growing both in like profit and headcount, where they're getting their money from, who's on their board, etc. And so that sort of reported financial data that I often use to like marry with some of the more qualitative information that you can glean from Lexis and Google Press searches. And of course, like LexisNexis is my savior for all things. Just an obscene amount of research and resources, both on individuals as well as various like industry press. Lexis is great at just collating all of that. So if you get a hang of how to use those search terms, instead of clicking through, a million websites on Google that you may not always have subscription to, you can really just put together a profile on a certain topic via Lexis that can include everything from industry reports to like lawsuits that a company may be facing, or patents that a company is filing. Looking at patents can sometimes hint you to where a company is trying to grow and what their ambitions are before the press gets a hold of it.
Wow.
So those are my favorites.
And I guess just like, Sara pretty much hit the nail on the head for me, but if you don't have licenses or subscriptions to any of these, because it could be expensive or they don't actually, have individual license options, and you just have to be a part of the company, which not everyone is. I would say a great place to look is go on the company website. Check it out. Check out their LinkedIn. Check out their company website, and go to press. Their press releases. And I think that you'll find a lot about their dealings, or investor relations page, and it gives you, links to like SEC websites, so you can check out like their filings and such. It's just a really, any recent business dealings that they've ever, that they've done that would be worth noting. Any departures or anything, like if you want to confirm if someone was at this particular company or not, and maybe they left pretty abruptly. What was that due to? Perhaps there's a press release about that. Maybe there were massive cuts. Maybe, they decide to part their ways for different reasons. But I think like if you don't have, access to Alexis or, some of these other tools that you kind of have to pay for, I think that's a really great place to start at the very least, and then from there, it'll lead you into, a different direction, right? Because, you go through a press release, maybe they mention a name, you look that up, perhaps their Bloomberg profile pops up, and then you can see where they've been in their career, what they've managed, who's managed them, their relationships. And so it's helpful to that degree. But that's probably the only thing I would add outside of what Sarah mentioned.
Yeah,
My-
that's such a good point, Tiffany. And like, there's also a danger of like getting too used to any one database and then forgetting you have like a world of free resources and just obvious things like the company's website that are so useful. Yeah, so it's always, and LinkedIn, like use everything, everything you have access to. Don't limit yourself to any one thing.
Absolutely. And this kind of tied into my second question, which was, how would you go about learning the pain points of a company? I think both of you already gave research strategies on doing that, and kind of just being creative, and with LexisNexis going to the company's website. But if you want to say anything more about that, that is great. I'm also going to tack on a second question, because in this course, we've been talking a lot about ESG and sustainable investing. And I've presented the pros of it and the cons of it, kind of some harsh critiques, and then some kind of hard data that shows, hey, this might actually work. So the first question would be, how do you learn about a company and its pain points? And then the second question is very broad again. What do you think of ESG?
That's hard. I guess like for me, how do you learn about a company and its pain points? It really depends entirely on what the pain point you're focusing on is, right? Because an organization is not going to have just one. I mean, if it's doing stuff well, it'll probably have a few problems,
Yeah.
It's a good point.
And so I think that that's really just depends on, what do you feel like, what that pain point is. If you're talking like, if you're interested, you hear perhaps maybe if you want to get to know what the culture is like at a company, I always say, Google the Glassdoor reviews, right? And maybe you'll find out a little bit more. I think, in our work, at least for me, when we were digging a little bit deeper into these SaaS forward, series, B, to see like startups, we were wondering a lot, obvious, especially if they had, proprietary technology, like why isn't this really getting off the ground? Why are they having problems with keeping people on board? Perhaps maybe it's, sales, and maybe the culture there is really toxic or so. Maybe the engineering team is being overworked and they're not happy there and stuff. But you can always find out this stuff in you know, through Glassdoor and websites like that. And I always go through like, you know, what people say about like salary and stuff, right? Because if it's sort of like a situation where like, okay, so they have enough money, if people are like raving about the salaries, but this company is not, you know, profitable, well, how are you able to pay all these people what you're paying them and you're not really making any money? That to me means like perhaps you guys have an issue allocating capital. Whoever's you know responsible for stuff there, the controller or the CFO. But it will, I think like the important thing to remember here is like it doesn't really matter any which tool you use or you know what you're focusing on, as long as you're you know still asking questions, right? It's not enough to just kind of read what it says and be like, okay. If you ask why, you'll probably end up at another part of the puzzle, right? With more information, and that's always super beneficial. And with ESG, I mean, I think ESG is, some people would argue that it's sort of the flavor of the month. I don't necessarily feel that way. I think that it can feel a little superficial right now, but I think that that's because it's new. And I think that with anything, it's sort of hard to get the ball moving when you've done investing a certain way for so long. We're talking about changing the way that people think about constructing a portfolio, like from the ground up. These are the fundamentals. We're changing that. We're saying, hey, you didn't think about the environment before, but it doesn't matter how much money you make if the world, if the earth isn't around for anyone to be spending money anyway, you know? So I think that, you know, if we partner, if we take, you know, ESG and we partner with innovation, you know, perhaps you know you can leverage you know blockchain to help you know further the agenda. It's all a part of like a, I think, a more creative, more sustainable way of investing, and that's just going to be better for people. Just overall, it hopefully I see it as a way to hold you know firms like mine accountable, you know, for what we're putting out in the world, right? So no controversial weapons, you know, no companies that you know have a really terrible track record of violating human rights, you know.
Good.
So I think, you know, I think in a way it's a way of holding, you know, firms like ours accountable. And a great way to see how companies are performing is, you know, so there's this thing called like a UN climate accord. And so several organizations signed that, and you can find out, and if you signed that, then you can look it up, it's UNPRI. And then there's reports every year about how your company performs, right? And you can see, hey, are these people just, you know, talking, or are they actually putting their words into action? And they get graded on it. So you can see their contributions and you know what they've you know done, at least as far as what they've said they were going to do, at least. So that's a great way to start. There's always sections of websites, especially if you're looking at financial firms, like there's always sections of websites completely dedicated to that. And like, for example, our company, Lord Abbott, has a section of our website that's entirely dedicated to that. We release a global corporate citizenship report every year. So there are resources that you can tap into, and people are quite transparent in what they're disclosing. So I'd encourage everyone to, you know, take some time out and, you know, do that kind of research. It's quite easy, I promise.
Nice. Sarah, did you have anything to add about ESG? I know you're in the nonprofit world now, but I think at Blue Heron you probably heard that phrase quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think I'll just like underscore everything Tiffany has said. I think that some of the mixed feelings and mixed misgivings people have about the ESG area at the moment is very much due to the fact that it is so new and we have a lot of details to hammer out. There's uh, just like a lot of, as Tiffany has said, a lot of reckoning with like our what our metrics have been saying about our priorities thus far. Um, and it's really exciting. Like that's not to say that we shouldn't be critical. We need to like watch closely and ensure that we're building out um, an actual way to measure ESG. But it is exciting that we are paying attention to these things and on a sort of company by company basis. In my world right now, it um, is is always really useful to dig into how a company talks about its ESG and like Tiffany's company putting out a corporate responsibility report. When you look at these reports, it really speaks to how much a company is actually attempting to hammer out metrics and like deliver on um, uh, specific
Goals,
measures
yeah.
and goals and like how much they're drilling down into that rather than just paying lip service to vague like governance and social and environmental um, goals. And when you look at these reports, like pay attention to the numbers and what they're actually measuring because it matters. And to the pain points, just generally, your earlier question, I guess, since we are discussing LinkedIn, like LinkedIn can be a really great place to um, get a sense of where a company is
Mhm,
lacking and where they're growing and where they're trying to grow. Like you can look at their job postings, not just
mhm.
to find a job, but to see where they are hiring. And it could be an indication of, growth in a certain area. It could be an indication of lack of talent in an area or a desired like directional shift. You can pay attention, even with like basic LinkedIn, I believe, you can see the average tenure of employees. So you can pay attention to how long folks are staying in that company and in their role. Is there a lot of turnover? If there is it in a specific type of category of role? Is it all, the technology workers? Is it across roles in the company? Uh, these things can kind of hint at larger issues.
Mhm.
Yes, that's a great point. I've read some studies about Amazon's next move being predicted by, oh, they posted 1,000 ads for software developers in Canada or something.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of get a hint of where a company is moving
Mhm,
through those HR trends. So I've told you both a bit about the final project for this class.
mhm.
I'm pretty excited. Everyone is coming up with their own business solution that balances a need for profit with a need for impact. So kind of an ESG proposal
Mm-hmm.
with Shark Tank thrown in there for excitement. But since this is a writing class, the final project will be around an email that they're going to pitch their idea to an executive, and they're also going to present their idea to the class, and the class is going to act like the general public. So, we're informed, but we're not experts. So, my question is, do you have general advice in pitching people your idea,
I
or
mean,
I mean, because both of you did that quite a bit. And
Yeah, oh boy. Oh man, that was stressful.
yeah. So pitching via email. What general advice do you have?
Well, this is like the inherent in the task and like a really obvious piece of advice, but it's just always worth emphasizing. Just know your audience. I think it is a very easy thing to say, but actually like producing a final product that weaves this throughout, like it requires deliberate intention and background research. You know, like what sector is this executive from? You know, what do you know about their career history? These sort of qualitative things matter. Just like even looking at their current role, like a CTO at a, you know, with a history at social media companies is not the same as a CTO who has worked at banks and fintech companies. They're coming from different worlds, and you have to take all of that into consideration. And you can really put yourself in that person's head when you're reviewing your own writing, and just try to see your work through someone else's. Pitch to yourself, pitch to an alter ego of yourself.
Absolutely.
I think to Sarah's point, obviously, I think you really know what you are asking for, right?
Yeah.
I think it's really important. If you don't know what you're pitching, you can't possibly answer questions about it. You know, people will have questions. When Sarah and I were pitching, just even having conversations with people, I think the biggest thing was people wanted to know what they were giving up their time for. You know, it wasn't enough to just be incentivized. It's like, okay, well, will you have questions prepared? Because I don't know if I really want to just sit there on the phone and just spitball with you, you know, like you come prepared, you know, come to the, conversation, know for how long you want to talk to them, and vice versa. Those are the kinds of parameters that we had to define. So you just define what you're asking for, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's, an opportunity, but be specific about your ask. I really can't stress that enough. And then it's just going to help you kind of keep yourself more organized, more structured, just in everything that you do. Because at the very least, you'll always kind of have that to be sort of your North Star. Like, does this align with what I'm asking, or is it outside of what I'm asking? So I think that's really important. And then I would just say, pardon me here, because I wrote some stuff down, so I'm just like trying to stay organized. But
Be prepared.
right. I do remember one time in a conversation, we were looking up an executive, a software executive, and he had a very good reputation for being able to like get the job done. And so I had to speak to him, and I remember someone saying about him that he was always, and this is to Sarah's point, like the quantitative stuff, really matters, is because he's like, it's fine that you feel a certain way about something, but the data doesn't lie. And I think that that's really important. So just definitely know what you're asking for, and make sure that your data is like strong, or that you have some data to come to the table with, right? Because it's only just going to support your argument. So I know not all of us would consider ourselves like, data driven or so, but we are to a degree, all that way. We just have to find out, for what reasons, and kind of exercise that. And so when you're clear about your ask and the data that you're looking for, you'll be able to make a very compelling argument. And I'm a fan of just keeping it simple,
Yeah, keeping it simple, knowing your ask. I love that how you phrased it, Tiffany, about know what you're asking someone to give up, and use some empathy and understanding whether they're going to want to make that trade or not. That's a really fascinating way of looking at it.
And the data will just help you, convince them further. And that's
Mhm.
always good to be a plus.
Yeah, let the data speak for itself. Well, thank you both so much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for letting
I
us
hope it
talk.
was helpful.
This was
Yeah.
very helpful.